The Empire burned 7 billion human lives. Humanity responded with Operation Annihilation. Part 1. The Day the Sky Burned Red. The alert came through before I even opened my eyes. Not a soft chime, not a standard ping. It was the kind of sound that the ship's emergency system only produced when the world was ending, a flat, repeating tone that vibrated through the walls of my bunk like a second heartbeat. I was out of my cot and pulling on my jacket before my brain had fully caught up with my body. My name is Yale Davar, Commander, Unified Defense Corps, 3rd Patrol Division. At the time this story begins, I was 31 years old, stationed aboard the long-range patrol vessel Ardent, approximately 640 million kilometers from Earth, somewhere between the outer ring of Jupiter's moons and a dead stretch of space that no one had bothered to name yet. We were supposed to be out there for another 6 days, running routine checks on the relay stations that kept communication lines open between the inner colonies and the deep frontier. Boring work. The kind of work where the biggest danger is spilling coffee on a control panel. I reached the bridge in under a minute. The crew was already there, 7 people staring at screens with the kind of silence that tells you everything before anyone says a word. Navigator Owen Price turned to me first. His face was pale, not worried pale, not surprised pale. It was the face of a man who had just seen something that his mind was refusing to fully process. "Commander," he said, "we're receiving an automated distress signal. Origin Earth." I sat down in my chair and pulled up the feed. What I saw on that screen, I will carry for the rest of my life. The images were coming in fragmented, corrupted by distance, and the disruption of relay stations going offline one by one. But even fragmented, even broken into pixels and static, there was no mistaking what had happened. Continent-sized columns of smoke rising from the northern hemisphere. Oceanic readings that made no sense, water temperatures spiking in patterns that pointed to something enormous hitting the planet's surface repeatedly, from above. And the communication grid, the vast, layered network of satellites and relay points that connected every human city, every human station, every human outpost, was simply gone, silent, dead. I looked at the timestamp on the first distress signal. It had been sent 22 hours ago. "How long have we been receiving this?" I asked. "About 4 minutes," said Communications Officer Lena Ward. Her voice was flat and controlled. She was fighting very hard to keep it that way. "The signals are coming through in fragments. The relay chain is almost completely down." "What is the source of the damage?" I asked. I already knew the answer. I needed to hear it said aloud because saying it made it real, and real things could be dealt with. Weapons Specialist Callum Gray looked at his screen for a long moment. "Orbital bombardment," he said quietly. "The energy signatures match Vethrak Dominion Class 6 fleet cannons. Long-range planetary strike configuration." The bridge went absolutely still. The Vethrak Dominion was the largest governing force in the known galaxy, a multi-species empire that had been expanding, absorbing, and erasing smaller civilizations for roughly 800 years. Humanity had known about them for 60 years. We had traded with their outer merchant fleets, argued with their diplomats, and carefully, nervously avoided getting in their way. We were small. They were enormous. The math was not in our favor, and every human strategist knew it. We had, apparently, gotten in their way. I pulled up the diplomatic files. It did not take long to find the cause, or at least, the stated cause. 14 months ago, a group of human colonial ships had established 3 new settlements in a stretch of space near the Orion threshold. The Vethrak Dominion claimed that region as sacred expansion territory, reserved under an ancient imperial edict that predated human spaceflight by 4 centuries. The colonial authority had filed the paperwork. The Dominion had responded with 2 formal warnings. The colonial authority had not moved the settlements, partly because of bureaucratic delay, and partly because no one genuinely believed the Dominion would respond with force over 3 small outposts containing fewer than 12,000 people. They had responded with force. They had responded with force across every human settlement simultaneously. I sat with that for a moment. Then I did what I was trained to do. I stopped feeling and started counting. "Pull me all available signal data," I said. "Any active human communication anywhere in the system. Colony stations, deep range outposts, frontier ships, anything." It took Lena 17 minutes to compile the picture. When it appeared on my screen, the number hit me like something physical. Out of the 11 billion human beings who had existed 60 hours ago, somewhere between 350 million and 420 million remained alive. They were scattered outpost crews, deep space patrols like ours, colony ships that had been in transit and therefore out of bombardment range, a handful of frontier stations near the edge of explored space. 7 billion people were gone. I sat with that number for a very long time. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that, not because I was strong, not because I was brave, not because commanders are not supposed to cry. I did not cry because my body simply could not process a number that large. 7 billion is not a number the human mind is built to absorb all at once. It sits outside the range of normal grief. It becomes something else, something colder. Then the Dominion's broadcast arrived. It was galaxy-wide, sent across every available frequency and every language the Dominion had on file, including 17 human languages. It was brief, formal, the kind of message you send when you believe the matter is already settled. It said, "The human contagion has been reduced to acceptable levels. Remnant populations may present themselves at designated processing stations for integration into Dominion labor programs. Further resistance will be interpreted as a declaration of hostile intent and will be met with complete elimination." They called us a contagion, like we were something unwanted that had spread too far. Callum Gray was the first one to speak after the broadcast ended. He was 24 years old, from a city in northern England that no longer existed. He looked at his screen for a moment, then looked at me. "Commander," he said, "what are your orders?" I thought about the 7 billion. I thought about the word contagion. I thought about processing stations and labor programs, and the quiet, confident tone of an empire that had never once considered the possibility that it might be making a mistake. I reached across my console and opened a secure channel, encrypted, tight beam, directed at every human signal source Lena had identified across the system. "This is Commander Yale Davar of the Ardent," I said. "I am transmitting on a secure frequency to all surviving human vessels and installations. Do not respond on open channels. Do not present yourselves at any Dominion processing station. Maintain silence and hold your positions." I paused. "The Dominion believes this is over. It is not over. Sit tight and wait for my next transmission." I closed the channel. Owen Price was watching me from across the bridge. "What are we going to do?" he asked. His voice was very quiet, not scared. Something more specific than scared, the tone of a person standing at the edge of something enormous, trying to see the bottom. I looked at the feed one more time. The burning continents, the dead communication grid, the formal broadcast from an empire that had already written us off and moved on to other business. "We are going to think," I said. And I turned off the feed, because I had seen enough, because looking at it longer would not bring anyone back, and I had work to do. They forgot something very basic about contagions. The thing about them, the reason they are dangerous, the reason they are so difficult to stop, is that they do not give up just because conditions become hostile. That is, in fact, when they are most dangerous. The Dominion had burned 7 billion human lives. I picked up my pen, pulled out a blank operations sheet, and began to write. Part 2. We do not mourn, we plan. The Ardent was not a warship. I want to make that clear from the beginning, because the story of what came next might sound like something only a warship crew could have started. It was not. The Ardent was a long-range patrol vessel designed for endurance, not combat. Her weapons system was a single forward-facing pulse array, the kind of thing you used to warn off pirates or push aside debris. She had a crew of 11. She carried enough food for 90 days, enough fuel for a year of slow travel, and a communication array that was good enough for deep space relay work, but nothing that would have impressed anyone at a military briefing. What we had was time and distance. We were far enough from the Dominion's immediate attention to think, and thinking, right then, was the most valuable resource in the universe. I spent the first 6 hours alone in my quarters with the data Lena had compiled. I read every signal fragment. I mapped every surviving human position I could confirm. I built a picture on paper, not on a screen paper, because screens can be traced and paper cannot, of where we were, what we had, and what the Dominion thought it knew about us. The picture was not good, but it was not as empty as the Dominion believed. What survived, beyond the scattered individuals and small crews, was this: 47 deep space mining platforms, mostly in the asteroid belt and the outer system, each one capable of independent operation for years. 22 colonial transport ships that had been in transit during the bombardment and were now running dark, no signals, no position broadcasts. 9 military vessels, 2 of them actual warships, the rest lightly armed patrol ships like mine, spread across the far edges of the system. Approximately 30 deep frontier outposts, some with populations in the hundreds, positioned far enough from the inner system to have survived simply because the Dominion had not bothered to reach that far yet. And then, sitting in a maintenance orbit around one of Neptune's smaller moons, a ship that should not have been there, the logistics carrier Crane, 700 meters long, designed to haul industrial equipment between colonies, retrofitted 3 years ago with a manufacturing bay that could produce small spacecraft components. She was not a weapon, but she was, I realized, a factory. I sent a tight beam signal to the Crane at hour 7. Her captain, a man named George Aldwick, answered in under 4 minutes. He was 53 years old and had been asleep when the bombardment happened. His crew of 38 had spent the last day sitting in the dark, listening to the Dominion's broadcast on repeat, trying to figure out what to do. "Commander Davar," he said, "please tell me you have a plan." "I have the beginning of one," I told him. "I need you to stay dark and stay where you are. I will be in contact." At hour 9, I sent a second signal, this one to the only person in the surviving human population whose knowledge I needed more than anyone else's. Her name was Miriam Osai. She was a xenobiologist stationed at Outpost 44 on the edge of the Kuiper Belt, a small research installation with a crew of 12. Miriam had spent 11 years studying the Vetherac Dominion, not their military, not their politics, their biology, their communication systems, the way their multi-species hierarchy actually functioned at the cellular level. If I was going to dismantle the Dominion, I needed to understand it first, and Miriam understood it better than any human alive. She answered my signal with her camera off. "I've been expecting someone to call," she said. "I wasn't sure who it would be." "What do you know about their coordination systems?" I asked. There was a pause, then her camera came on. She looked tired and very calm. "More than I've ever put in any official report," she said. At hour 12, I sent a general encrypted transmission to every human signal source on my list. It was not long. I am not a person who wastes words. It said, "Do not comply, do not surrender, maintain position, we are not done." 43 separate acknowledgments came back within the hour. 43 felt, at that moment, like the most hopeful number I had ever seen. At hour 14, I called a meeting on the Ardent's bridge. I spread my paper maps across the navigation console and laid out what I had built. Not a battle plan, not yet. Something more basic than that. A framework, a way of thinking about what humanity was and what the Dominion was not expecting us to be. I looked around at my crew. Lena Ward, 28, Communications; Callum Gray, 24, Weapons; Owen Price, 30, Navigation; 6 others, 11 people in total, sitting in a patrol ship at the edge of the solar system, looking at a map of an empire that contained 1 trillion beings and spanned 40 star systems. "They think we are finished," I said. "They think 400 million scattered survivors cannot threaten a civilization of their size. And if we fight the way they expect us to fight, with ships against ships, force against force, they are correct." I paused. "So we are not going to fight the way they expect." Callum looked at the map. "What are we going to do?" "We are going to use everything they don't know about us," I said. "They have studied our official military. They have studied our weapons systems and our fleet configurations. They have not studied how humans actually solve problems, which is messily, creatively, and without giving up." Miriam's voice came through the speaker. I had kept her channel open. "They also have not studied their own weaknesses," she said. "The Dominion runs on a centralized coordination network. Their fleet communication, their supply chain management, their interspecies hierarchy signals, it all runs through a layered signal system called the Veth Grid. It is extremely powerful. It is also, in certain specific conditions, extremely vulnerable to disruption." "How specific?" I asked. "Specific enough that I've been sitting on this information for 4 years, because I was afraid of what it would mean if humans ever needed to use it," she said. "We need to use it," I said. There was a long pause. "Yes," she said, "I know." Lena was already pulling up charts. "If we can disrupt their coordination grid, even partially," she said, "their fleet response time drops significantly. They fight as a unit because they communicate as a unit. Break the communication and you break the unit." "That's Phase 2, I said. "Phase 1 is simpler. The Dominion runs its outer system supply chain through 18 major fuel distribution platforms. I've identified 12 of them from the trading route data our colonial ships logged over the past 30 years. Those platforms are not military installations. They are logistics nodes. They are not heavily defended because no one has ever threatened them." Callum's eyes moved to the map. I watched him work through the geometry. "We don't have the firepower to." "We don't need firepower," I said. "We have mining platforms, 47 of them. Each one carries enough industrial explosive charge to clear asteroid debris. What clears asteroid debris will certainly clear a logistics platform." The bridge was quiet for a moment. George Aldwick's voice came through the channel from the crane. He had been listening. "You want to use civilian mining equipment as a military weapon," he said. "I want to use what we have," I said. "The Dominion is expecting warships. We are going to send them something they have no category for." I looked at the map one more time. 18 supply platforms, 47 mining ships, 12 of those platforms within range. "They called us a contagion," I said. "They should have thought more carefully about what that word means." I started drawing lines on the paper. The plan had a shape now. It was rough and it was dangerous and it was built from borrowed parts and desperate math. But it was a plan. I named it Operation Annihilation that night, not out of anger, not out of grief. Out of precision, because that was exactly what it was going to be. I did not sleep. None of us did. We had too much work to do. 400 million people were out there in the dark, waiting for someone to tell them it was not over. I was going to make sure it was not over. The Dominion had made their move. They had done it with absolute confidence, absolute power, and absolute certainty that the outcome was already decided. They did not know us at all. Part 3, Ghost Fleet Rising. The Dominion did not see us coming. That is the part I want you to understand before anything else, not because it makes us sound clever, and not because I am proud of the deception. I want you to understand it because it tells you something important about the difference between power and awareness. The Dominion had power. Enormous, ancient, multi-system power. They had fleets and weapons and a communication network that spanned 40 star systems. They had 800 years of experience absorbing and dismantling civilizations that stood in their way. What they did not have was awareness. They had looked at humanity and seen a small, young species with limited range and basic technology. They had filed us under manageable threat and acted accordingly. And once they believed the problem was solved, they stopped paying attention. That was the space we moved through. In the third week after the broadcast, I had made contact with 43 separate human groups. By the end of the fifth week, that number had grown to 112. Ships, outposts, mining platforms, colony transports running dark in the outer system. They were all still out there, waiting, listening to my encrypted transmissions, holding their positions. I gave each group a simple set of instructions. Do not broadcast. Do not move without a signal from me. Do not engage any Dominion vessel directly. Stay dark and stay alive. And then I gave them something else. I gave them a purpose. Every group I contacted had something useful. The mining platforms had explosives and heavy equipment. The colony transports had food stores and manufacturing bays. Outpost 44 had Miriam Os and 11 years of Vetherac research. The Crane had George Aldwick and a production facility that was already, quietly, being converted to build something very specific. George had figured out what I needed before I told him. He was a smart man. He had read the plans I sent, run the numbers, and called me back 2 days later to say, I can build them, but I need raw materials and I need time. How much time? I asked. 6 weeks for the first batch, he said. After that, faster. You have 5, I said. Right, he said, and closed the channel. What George was building were small, unmanned delivery craft. Simple in design, barely more than a navigation system, a propulsion unit, and a payload bay. They were not weapons themselves. They were carriers. What they carried was determined by what target they were assigned to. For the fuel platforms, they carried charges from the mining ships. For the communication nodes, they carried the package Miriam had been working on since the second day. A specifically engineered signal disruptor designed to interface with the VethGrid's outer relay architecture. Not a weapon, not something that harmed living beings, just noise. Precise, targeted, structured noise that would make the Vetherac coordination signal fold in on itself like a radio caught between 2 competing frequencies. Miriam called it a ghost signal. It doesn't destroy anything, she told me. It just makes everything in range very, very confused. How long will the confusion last? I asked. For a standard Vetherac relay node, she said. 3 to 5 weeks before their technicians can isolate and clear it. That's enough, I said. The operation launched on a Tuesday. I know that sounds like an oddly ordinary detail, a Tuesday, but I remember it precisely because Lena made a comment about it that morning. She said, "We are about to start a war and it is a Tuesday." And Callum said, "Every significant human event happens on a Tuesday. I don't know why." And for about 4 seconds, all 11 of us laughed. And then we got back to work. The launch was coordinated across 7 separate locations. 11 mining platforms moved simultaneously to pre-assigned positions relative to 12 Dominion fuel distribution nodes. George's delivery craft, 30 of them in the first batch, slipped out of the Crane's bay and began their slow, dark journeys toward the Vetherac outer communication relays. Miriam's signal packages were loaded and armed. No human being was within weapons range of any Dominion installation during any part of Phase 1. The fuel platforms detonated across a 4-hour window, not all at once, staggered, spread across the Dominion's outer supply chain in a pattern designed to maximize confusion about the source. 12 platforms, 12 simultaneous logistics crises, spread across enough distance that the Dominion's emergency response teams could not cover all of them at once. In the wreckage of each platform, buried in the debris field, was a small beacon. It transmitted a single repeating number. 7 billion. No explanation, no demands, no signature, just the number. I heard later, much later, through fragments of intercepted Dominion communication, that the Vethrak High Command's initial response was to assume a malfunction. Platforms did not simply explode. There was no fleet movement detected, no known weapon signature, no logical actor identified. The very absence of an obvious enemy was, to them, more unsettling than the explosions themselves. By the time they had ruled out malfunction and begun looking for an external cause, the ghost signals had reached the outer communication relays. The Vethgrid did not go dark. That would have been too obvious, too dramatic. It did something more disorienting. It went uncertain. Signals arrived at the wrong times. Coordination packets were delivered out of sequence. The multi-species fleet divisions that normally operated in tight, precise choreography began experiencing small delays, nothing catastrophic at first, just enough friction to make every action take longer than expected. The kind of friction that compounds. Miriam had described it to me once as, imagine waking up and finding that your sense of time is slightly off. Every clock in your house is running at a different speed. Nothing is wrong enough to fix, but everything is wrong enough to notice. In week 3, a young man named Callum Gray was standing at his console when an intercepted Dominion broadcast came through. It was an internal signal, not meant for outside reception. One of the relay disruptions had bent the signal outward. It was from a Vethrak fleet coordination officer to his superior command. The translation software took 11 minutes to process it. When the translation appeared on screen, Callum read it quietly to the rest of the bridge. The officer was asking his commander what had attacked them. He had no answer. The official report listed the cause of the fuel platform losses as unknown external event. The communication relay disruptions were listed as unexplained technical degradation. The Dominion, in other words, had not yet identified us as the cause. They knew something was happening. They did not know what it was. Callum looked up from the screen. They don't know it's us, he said. No, I said. They think the problem is somewhere inside their own system. Lena turned from her console. That's terrifying for them, she said. An enemy outside your borders is a problem with a solution. A problem inside your own system. That's a different kind of fear. I nodded. Good. In week 4, something unexpected happened, something I had not planned for, but that changed the shape of everything that followed. A relay outpost near the edge of the Vethrak Dominion's second expansion arm was not a communication node. It was a holding station, a facility where the Dominion kept populations of non-Vethrak species who had been absorbed into the Empire and assigned to various labor functions. It was, in simple terms, a prison that did not call itself a prison. George's delivery craft, navigating on a route that had been mapped from old trading data, passed close enough to the station that its passive sensors picked up life sign readings. George flagged it in his log and sent me the data. I looked at it for a long time. I had not planned to liberate anyone. I had planned a surgical, unmanned operation that minimized risk to the surviving human population. Adding a crewed mission to the plan meant adding exposure, and exposure meant danger. I called a meeting. Owen Price, who was the quietest member of my crew and who almost never volunteered an opinion, spoke first. They are prisoners, he said. If we leave them and the Dominion finds out we were in that area, those people will be the ones who pay for it. That was the argument, simple and complete. I looked around the bridge. No one disagreed. The mission went to a 4-person team in the Arden's only small landing craft, a utility shuttle not much bigger than a family vehicle. I did not send Callum, who was too valuable to risk. I sent Lena, because she spoke the most languages and could manage communication. I sent 2 crew members who had previous EVA experience. And I sent myself, because I was not willing to ask anyone to go somewhere I would not go. The station was lightly staffed. The Dominion had not seen a reason to guard it heavily. No one had ever attempted to free any of its population before. We docked at a maintenance port, cut our way through 2 internal barriers with mining equipment, and reached the central holding section in under 20 minutes. There were 3 species inside. The Shar, a tall, gray-skinned people from a system 4 light years from the Dominion's core. The Molendi, who were smaller and moved in groups and communicated by a combination of sound and color shift. And the Creel, who were the most numerous, a quiet, careful people who had been in Dominion custody for 60 years. The Creel elder who met us at the cell block door looked at me for a long moment. I do not know what she saw. I know what she said. Through the translation software, "You are human." "Yes," I said. "The Dominion said your kind was finished." "The Dominion was wrong," I said. "We need to move quickly. Will you come?" She looked back at her people. She looked at me again. "Where will we go?" "Somewhere safe," I said. "I promise." I cannot always keep every promise. I kept that one. We got everyone out. 112 individuals across 3 species, loaded into the crane in shifts over the following 72 hours. George made room. He always made room. What happened next was not something I engineered. It was something that simply grew from the act of keeping that promise. The Creel elder's name was something my translation software rendered as a long, multi-tone sound. She told me I could call her anything simple, so I called her Elder and she accepted that. Within a week of being aboard the crane, she came to me with information. She had been inside the Dominion's administrative network for 60 years. She had cleaned their offices, maintained their systems, existed in the background of their operation while they spoke freely around her, the way powerful people always speak freely around those they consider beneath notice. She knew the layout of their command infrastructure in ways that no human intelligence report had ever captured. She sat down across from me and put a hand-drawn map on the table between us. "The Warlord Council," she said, "meets in a location the Dominion considers secure. It is secure because no enemy has ever reached it." She pushed the map toward me. "But you have my people now," she said, "and I have been waiting 60 years to give someone this." The galaxy was watching by then. I had heard from Miriam that signals were circulating in non-Dominion space, species who monitored the Veth grid disruptions and the fuel platform losses, piecing together a picture of something happening that did not fit any known pattern. They were not ready to act. They were not ready to stand against the Dominion openly, but they were watching. And for the first time in the history of the known galaxy, the Vetherac Dominion held an emergency session of the High Command to discuss an enemy they could not identify, could not locate, and could not stop. We were 400 million people with mining ships and a factory boat and a xenobiologist and a map drawn from memory by a 60-year prisoner. And we were just getting started. Part 4, The Weight of 7 Billion. I did not sleep on the night that Erasure Fleet Alpha found Outpost 31. I want to tell this part carefully because it is the part where the story could have gone wrong. Not militarily, I mean morally. And the moral decisions you make in a war are the ones you have to live with after it ends. Outpost 31 was a deep frontier installation, roughly 18 light hours from the outer edge of the solar system. It had a population of 4,300 people, miners, engineers, a medical team, a small group of researchers and their families. It was one of the installations I had contacted in the first week. Their station commander, a man named Alan Birch, had acknowledged my transmission and gone dark exactly as instructed. He had done everything right. The Erasure fleet found them anyway. I do not know how. I still do not know with certainty whether it was a signal error on their end or a new Dominion tracking technology or simply bad luck. The Dominion had deployed the Erasure fleet, an old but powerful rapid response system designed specifically to locate and destroy surviving hostile populations, 3 weeks after the fuel platform attacks. I had known it was out there. I had been tracking its general movement patterns through fragments of intercepted signals. I had not moved fast enough. The transmission from Outpost 31 lasted 49 seconds before it cut out. Alan Birch's voice was very calm. He said, "Commander Davar, Erasure Fleet is in range. We are unable to evacuate. Please continue the operation." Then static. 4,300 people. I sat with it the way I had sat with the original number. Cold and still and trying to stay inside the part of my brain that could still think, because the other part, the part that understood what 4,300 individual lives meant, 4,300 people who had gone dark as instructed, who had trusted my plan, who had done everything right, that part would not help anyone. Callum Gray sat across from me at the planning table. He had not spoken in 2 hours. He was 24 years old. He had lost his city. He had just lost 4,300 more people. "Is the plan still working?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Then we keep going," he said, not a question. I nodded. But something had shifted. I felt it shift and I could not ignore it, because ignoring it would have been the beginning of something I did not want to become. The Elder had given me a map. Miriam had given me a method. George had given me the tools. And somewhere in the architecture of Operation Annihilation's final phase, the piece I had been building toward from the beginning, there was a decision I had been avoiding. The Warlord Council met in a facility on the Dominion's capital planet, in a city whose name translated roughly to the permanent seat. The facility was deep inside a planetary defense grid, a shield system that, if activated, could repel an orbital strike from a Class 6 fleet. It had never been turned off in recorded history. There was no conventional military force in the known galaxy that could breach it. But the Elder's map did not show me the military approach. It showed me the maintenance corridors, the service tunnels that ran under the shield grid's power architecture, the access points that the Dominion's administrative staff used every day, because shields require constant maintenance, and maintenance requires access. And access means there is always a door. To use that door, I needed to drop a section of the shield temporarily. To drop the section, I needed to hit a specific relay point on the planet's outer atmospheric layer with a focused electromagnetic pulse. The pulse itself would not harm the planet's surface. It would create a 40-minute window in one section of the shield. That was the plan. The problem, the part I had been sitting with for 2 weeks, turning over in my mind in the small hours of each night, was that the relay point sat in the upper atmosphere above a populated region. The pulse would have no direct effect on the population, but dropping that shield section, even for 40 minutes, exposed 300 million Vethrak civilians to potential orbital risk during the window. I was not planning to strike from orbit during the window. My team would be going in through the maintenance access, but a 40-minute shield gap above a civilian population meant that if anything went wrong, if the timeline slipped, if a crew member was captured or a signal was intercepted, and the Dominion realized what was happening and moved their own fleet assets in a panic, then 300 million people were at risk, and the decision that put them at risk was mine. I called a planning session. The full council, that was what we were calling it now, the 13 people who made up the core of the operation. Admiral Warren Torres was the former commanding officer of one of the 2 surviving human warships. He was 61 years old. He had fought in 3 border conflicts before the bombardment. He was the most experienced military mind I had access to, and he was as close to a peer as I had in this operation. He looked at the plan for a long time, then he looked at me. "We strike," he said. "The window is the window. The civilians are not our responsibility." "They are beings with lives," I said. "The Dominion bombed Earth," he said. 7 billion people." "I know," I said. I am holding all 7 billion of them every time I make a decision. That is exactly why I will not do to 300 million others what was done to us." Tors was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The operation becomes significantly harder if you don't use the window." "I know," I said. Miriam was on the communication channel from Outpost 44, where she had relocated to work closer to a captured Vethorak communication array. "The Warlord Council," she said, "made the decision to bomb Earth. The Council is 11 beings. The civilian population of the capital planet had no vote and no knowledge. The Dominion is a caste empire. The lower populations are not consulted on military action." "I know that too," I said. "Then you know that punishing the civilian population for the Council's decision is not justice," Miriam said. "It is just repetition." The word landed very quietly in the room. Repetition. I had spent months telling myself we were different, that the operation was different, that what we were doing was not the same as what had been done to us, and the way to stay different, the only way, was to make choices that proved it, even when those choices were harder. Callum, who had been silent through the entire meeting, spoke one word. "No," he said. Everyone looked at him. "We don't use the window," he said. "We find another way or we take longer, but we don't do it that way." No one argued with him. I think because everyone in the room understood that Callum was 24 years old and had lost more than any of them, and if he could hold that line, the rest of us had no excuse not to. I looked at the Elder's map for a long time. Then I found the other door. It was not obvious. It was not clean. It required a different approach to the maintenance access, one that went through a section of the Dominion's deep orbital service infrastructure rather than through the atmospheric relay. It added 11 days to the timeline. It required a larger team going in with less support, and it had a significantly higher risk of detection. It also completely avoided the civilian exposure window. I redrew the plan overnight. When I presented the new version in the morning, Tors studied it for a long time. Then he said, "This is harder." "Yes," I said. "The casualty risk to our team is higher." "Yes," I said. "And you're doing it anyway." "Yes," I said. He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "All right." I looked around the room. At Callum, who had not slept. At Lena, who was already running communications checks for the new route. At George, whose voice came through the speaker with the quiet practicality of a man who had spent 2 months building impossible things out of available materials and was prepared to keep doing so. 12 days, George said. "I can have the team equipped in 12 days. 11, I said. 11, he agreed. I stepped out of the planning room and stood alone in the corridor for a moment. The ship was quiet around me. Somewhere at the edge of the solar system, the Erasure fleet was still moving. The Dominion was still broadcasting its integration decrees to the silent stars. I thought about Alan Birch's voice in that 49-second transmission. Calm, certain, please continue the operation. I thought about 7 billion names I would never know. I thought about 300 million people on a planet whose leaders had done something terrible, who had not voted for it and had not known it was coming, who were just living their lives in the orbit of a power structure they had been born into. I thought about what it meant to carry the dead with you, not as a weight that crushed you down, as a compass, something that told you which direction was right when everything else was noise. The direction was clear. We were going in. We were going to end this. And we were going to do it in a way that, when it was over, we could still recognize ourselves. Part 5, Operation Annihilation, Final Hour. The plan was 11 days in the making and 60 seconds in the executing. I want to tell you how it happened, not the broad strokes, the strategy, the objectives, the outcome. I want to tell you the exact texture of it. The cold inside the maintenance corridor, the weight of the equipment bag on my shoulder, the sound of Lena's breathing through the communication earpiece. The way the elder walked directly behind me without making a sound, because 60 years of moving quietly through a building that was not yours teaches you things that no amount of training can replicate. But I am getting ahead of myself. The 11 days before were not quiet days. We had not stopped the operation's other threads while we rebuilt the final phase. George's delivery craft were still running their routes. Miriam's ghost signals were still threading through the Veth grid. In the outer system, the surviving human ships were maintaining their silence and holding their positions, receiving my encrypted transmissions every 48 hours, brief, factual, and always ending the same way. Hold your position. We are not done. On day 4 of the 11, something happened that I had hoped for but not expected. A signal came through on a non-human frequency, one of the alien communication bands that Miriam monitored as a standard practice. It was brief and very carefully coded. The translation took 3 hours, not because it was complex, but because the language it was written in was one that had not been officially used in public communication for 12 years. It was from the Shar government in exile. They had been watching the Veth grid disruptions. They had heard, through their own networks, about the fuel platform losses. They had been contacted quietly by the Shar individuals we had freed from the holding station. The message said, essentially, "We cannot help you openly. The Dominion is too powerful and we are too afraid, but we will not report your position if we detect it. And there is a maintenance access code for the orbital service ring around the capital planet that was last updated 6 years ago. We have attached it to this message. We do not know if it still works." It still worked. I sat with that for a moment. One group of afraid, careful, non-human people reaching out across the dark to hand us a key they had been holding for 6 years, waiting for someone who might need it. I thought about what it had cost them to send that message, how much fear they had pushed past to do it. I sent back a single line, "We will remember this." On day 7, the Molendi, the color-shifting people from the holding station, who had been living quietly aboard the crane, sent a representative to George's office. The representative communicated through a translation device the size of a thick book, and told George that 12 Molendi were willing to join the team going into the capital installation. They knew the internal layout of Dominion administrative facilities from their own years of captivity. They were small and very fast and extremely quiet. George called me immediately. "I have 12 volunteers," he said. "Are they certain?" I asked. He turned to the Molendi representative. A brief exchange. "They say they are very certain," he reported. On day 9, Callum came to me with something he had built himself during the nights I had not required him on shift. He had taken 3 of George's smallest delivery craft and modified them. Not weapons. Something more elegant, a simultaneous signal burst system that could, when activated from a single point, transmit our prepared communication on every available frequency to every known receiver in the local galaxy within approximately 4 minutes. "For after," he said, putting the designs on the table in front of me. "For after," I agreed. Day 11 arrived. The team was 23 people. Myself, Lena, Callum, 3 crew members from the Ardent, the Elder, 7 Creel individuals who had requested to come, and 12 Molendi. We launched in 4 separate small craft from 4 separate locations and converged at a dead signal point on the far side of the Dominion's capital planet approximately 6 hours before the planned entry. Warren Torres, aboard the warship Constancy, held position with the rest of the fleet, 18 vessels in total, ranging from George's crane to 2 genuine warships to a collection of retrofitted freighters that would not have looked intimidating to anyone. They were there not to fight, but to respond, and to witness. The Shar access code worked on the 3rd attempt. The orbital service ring's maintenance hatch opened inward, silently, into a corridor lit by the faint blue operational lighting of a facility that was fully active but not expecting visitors. The Elder moved forward, and I followed her. She knew every junction. She had told me later she had walked these corridors in her mind every night for 30 years, mapping and remapping until the path was as familiar as her own hands. She moved without hesitation, and we moved with her. The 12 Molendi went ahead in pairs, moving through the corridor system with a speed and silence that I could not match and did not try to match. They cleared each section and sent a color pulse signal back, green for clear, before we advanced. Not a single alarm was triggered. Lena was managing the communication thread the entire time. Her voice in my earpiece a steady, quiet presence. Outer ring clear, inner ring approaching. 14 minutes to primary objective. I want to tell you about the weight of those 14 minutes. Not fear, exactly. There was not much room for fear because there was too much to track, too many variables to hold. It was more like a very particular kind of focus. The kind that narrows the world down to the next step, the next junction, the next color pulse from a Molendi at the edge of sight. Callum was beside me. He had not spoken since we entered the facility. He was carrying a signal device in his left hand and had not let go of it once since we boarded the shuttle. The primary objective was a chamber on the facility's third internal level, the High Council meeting room. The council met on a fixed schedule. Miriam had confirmed this from signal intercepts. And on this day, at this hour, they were in session. They were in session because we had made sure they would be. For the past 4 days, we had fed carefully constructed false signal traffic through the Vethgrid fragments, traffic that suggested a new human fleet was massing near the Orion threshold, threatening the very region the Dominion had destroyed 7 billion people to protect. The Council had convened to respond to the threat. The threat was us, but not in the way they thought. We reached the outer door of the chamber at the 12-minute mark. The elder put her hand on the door panel. She looked at me. "You should go first," she said. "I have waited 60 years. I can wait 12 more seconds." I went first. The council chamber was large and circular. 11 beings sat at a curved table, 9 Vetharak, one from a species I did not recognize, one who was the Dominion's chief administrative liaison, a position held by a non-Vetharak as a formality of inclusion that fooled no one. The 9 Vetharak were the Warlord Council, the ones who had made the decision. The room went completely still when I walked through the door. The High Warlord, I had studied his image from intercepted records, sat at the center of the table. He was older than I had expected. 7 feet tall, silver-plated carapace, 6 eyes that caught the light in a way that was deeply unnerving. He was looking at me with the particular expression of a being who has just encountered something that does not fit inside any category he possesses. I stood there for a moment and let him look. "You are human," he said. The translation came through the earpiece Miriam had patched remotely into my equipment. "Yes," I said. "There are no humans," he said. The problem was resolved. "There are approximately 400 million humans," I said, "and you have been at war with them for the past 2 months without knowing it. The fuel platforms were us. The Vethgrid disruptions were us. The holding station liberation was us. This is us." The warlord was quiet for a moment. Around the table, the other council members were very still. "What do you want?" he asked. It was such an old question. The first thing any power asks when it realizes it has been caught off guard, "What do you want?" Because the assumption behind the question is that everything has a price, that everyone, at the bottom of any action, is after something that can be bargained with. "Accountability," I said, "for 7 billion lives." He looked at me for a moment. "You cannot defeat this empire," he said. "You have disrupted our logistics. You have created temporary communications issues. You have achieved nothing permanent." "I have achieved this room," I said, "and I have achieved the past 2 months. In 2 months, 400 million people with no dedicated military force have repeatedly penetrated your infrastructure, disrupted your communications, freed prisoners from your facilities, and walked into your most secure installation without triggering a single alarm. I looked around the table. The question is not whether we can defeat you. The question is what you think is going to happen over the next 2 years if you do not resolve this now. The warlord looked at me. I looked at him. The species you freed, he said slowly, from the holding station. Yes. They have been sharing information. Yes. You have allies among the border systems. Growing ones, I said, quietly, because they have been waiting for someone to demonstrate that you can be touched. We have demonstrated that. The room was very quiet. Callum stepped forward. He held up the signal device in his left hand. This transmits a full record of this conversation and everything that led to it to every available receiver in the local galaxy, he said. It is set on a 7-minute delay. At the end of 7 minutes, if Commander Davar does not enter a deactivation code, it transmits. The warlord looked at the device. You are negotiating, he said. No, I said. I am giving you a choice. The choice is between accountability and the alternative. What is the alternative? 7 minutes, Callum said. The Warlord Council did not fight. I want to be honest about that. The story might sound more dramatic if they did, if there was a confrontation of force. But they did not fight. They were 11 beings sitting in a room with 23 people who had just proven, comprehensively, that the Dominion's defenses had not been enough. And outside, in orbit, the full picture of the human operation was being transmitted to them in real time by Lena, the fleet positions, the infrastructure losses, the Veth grid state, the growing list of non-Dominion species who had been observing and quietly communicating with us. The math was not the same math as before. The Dominion was still larger, but the question was no longer about size. The question was about what the next 2 years would look like if they chose to continue. The warlord looked at me for a long time. Then he looked at the other council members. Then he looked back at me. What does accountability look like? He asked. The council answers for its decision before an independent tribunal, I said. Not human-run, not Dominion-run. The neutral systems in the border region have been waiting for something like this for a long time. Give them the jurisdiction. You are asking us to surrender governance. I am asking the Council, 11 beings, to answer for a specific decision. The Dominion as a structure continues. It simply continues without the capacity to make that specific kind of decision again, ever, without consequences. I leaned forward slightly. I'm also asking you to understand something very clearly. We are not finished building. Every week, George Aldwick is producing more delivery craft. Every week, Miriam Osa is developing new interference methodologies. Every week, 400 million human beings are getting more organized and more prepared, because that is what humans do. We get better at problems the longer we work on them. We are 2 months into this. We are just starting. The 7-minute timer was at 4 minutes and 30 seconds when the High Warlord spoke. We will discuss the tribunal, he said. Callum entered the deactivation code. What followed was not quick. Nothing that comes after a moment like that is quick. The negotiation took months. The tribunal process took longer. The Vetherac Council members who had authorized the bombardment were brought before a 7-species independent panel in the neutral systems, and the proceedings were broadcast on every frequency that would carry them. But there was something that happened before any of that. Something I had not planned, but that became, in my mind, the center of everything. On the day after the council meeting, I sent a signal, not to the Dominion, not to the surviving human ships, to Callum's transmission system. It was a list. 7 billion names. Every human name our records could reconstruct: the planetary registries, the colonial logs, the crew manifests, the outpost rosters. Every name we had. Not every name, we could not recover every name, but every name we had. No explanation, no demands, no coordinates, no victory announcement. Just the names. It went out on every frequency Callum's system could reach. The signal traveled at the speed of light toward every inhabited system in the local galaxy. It would reach some of them in years, some in decades, some in centuries. But it would reach them. I was standing at the viewport of the Ardent when Lena confirmed the transmission was away. The solar system was visible from where I stood, the sun a bright point, the planets too small to see but present, orbiting in their old patterns regardless of what had happened around them. Owen Price came to stand beside me. He was quiet for a moment. "What happens now?" he asked. "We go home," I said. He looked at the viewport. "Home is." "I know what home is," I said. "We still go back." The Ardent made the transit in 11 days. The planet's surface was still marked by the bombardment. There are things that cannot be repaired quickly, scars that the land holds for generations. I had known that intellectually. Standing in orbit and seeing it was different from knowing it. Callum stood at the viewport for a long time without speaking. The Elder came to stand with us. She had chosen to make the journey with the Ardent's crew rather than return to her people immediately. She said she wanted to see the planet, the one the Dominion had thought was worth burning. She stood at the viewport and looked at it in silence. After a long time, she said, "It is still here." "Yes," I said. "They tried to make it nothing," she said. "They did not succeed." "No," I said, "they didn't." She was quiet for another moment. Then she said, "My people have a practice. When something survives that should not have survived, we record its name and the reason it survived, so that future generations understand that survival is not an accident. It is a decision." I looked at her. "Then record this," I said. "Humanity survived because 400 million people in the dark decided that the only acceptable response to being told they were finished was to prove that they were not." She nodded slowly. "What is the word," she said, "in your language for people who continue past the point where others would stop?" I thought about it for a moment. "We have many words for it," I said. "Stubborn, relentless, determined. But the one I like best is simply human." She thought about that for a moment. Then she said, "Yes, I will use that word." I looked at the planet below, the scarred surface, the still-orbiting stations beginning slowly to come back online, the ships trickling in from the outer system, one by one, ending their dark running and returning to the light. 400 million people, coming home to rebuild a world that no longer looked the way it had. 7 billion names, traveling at the speed of light toward every corner of the galaxy. And somewhere in the neutral systems, 11 beings sitting before a tribunal that would spend 3 years reviewing the evidence before rendering a verdict that every non-Dominion species in the known galaxy would broadcast simultaneously on the day it was delivered. We had not erased the Dominion. I had never wanted to. Erasing them would have made us the same as them, and being the same as them was the one thing I had refused to allow. What we had done was something more permanent. We had proven that there were consequences, that the calculation, burn a species and absorb the remnants, was not a safe calculation, that somewhere in the galaxy there would always be the possibility that the remnants would surprise you. Callum came to stand beside me at the viewport. He still had the signal device in his hand. He had been carrying it since we left the council chamber. "It's done," he said. "Yes," I said. He was quiet. I waited. 4,300 people on Outpost 31, he said. Alan Birch said please continue the operation. "I know," I said. "Was it worth it?" he asked, not as a challenge. As a genuine question, the kind that only someone who has paid a real cost has the right to ask. I thought about it for a long time. "I don't think that's the right question," I said. "The right question is whether it was necessary, and the answer to that is yes, because the alternative was nothing. The alternative was disappearing quietly, and we are not a species that disappears quietly." He nodded slowly. Below us the planet turned. They called us a contagion, Lena said from somewhere behind us. I had not heard her come to the viewport. Yes, I said. We should have told them, she said, that the thing about contagions is that they are not diseases. They are signals. They spread because they carry something that changes the environment around them. I looked at the planet. What did we carry? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. The idea, she said, that it is possible to survive something that was designed to end you, and that surviving it and choosing what to do with that survival, that is the most dangerous thing in the universe. I did not say anything for a long time. The sun was rising over the planet's eastern hemisphere. Slow, quiet, exactly as it had always done, as it had done every single day for 4.5 billion years, regardless of anything that happened in the space above it. 7 billion names, moving through the dark toward every star that had a planet with someone on it. One planet turning in the light. And a crew of 11 people standing at a viewport, watching. We had done what needed to be done. We had done it in a way we could live with. And now the long, hard work of coming after was beginning. The rebuilding, the grief that had been waiting patiently behind the action, the generations of decisions that would be shaped by what had happened here. But that work was possible now. It was possible because we were still here to do it. The Empire had burned 7 billion human lives. We were still here. That was the answer. That had always been the answer. We were still here.